What's up, everyone? Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Legal Score. I am your host, SONJA PEARSON. Hope everyone's having an amazing day. Today is August the 15th, 2026, and I'm live. So make sure you come on in and say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. Um, Guys, today, Saturdays is always the day that I talk about some legal topics, the big cases that are in today's news that are trending. And today's topic, guys, I told you guys last night on Friday with the fellas that I'd be going back into history. So, for those who were not here prior to 30 years ago, even if you were a kid, you probably don't remember. But if you were an adult, you definitely remember one of the greatest rappers alive, Tupac Shakur. Finally, have a jury seated in his trial. For those who do not know who he is or who he was, should I say, I'm going to go back and give you guys a little bit of revisionist history. Tupac first caught the public attention as a roadie, a dancer, and featured rapper on Digital Underground. This is another group from the 90s, 1991. They had this hit called The Same Song. He had a solo feature on that rap. And then he came out with Tupacalypse Now, a late album that specific year. And this was the year that would go into 1993 that would actually speak about where we are today with his fandom and everything. What's up, Danny? Thank you so much for saying hello today, Danny Fuller, one of my good friends here that always supports the podcast. So great to have you on today, Danny. Let me make sure I got your comment up here. All right, it says show. Let's see. I'm using a different device. Y'all know how that goes. All right. So anyway, um, just gonna bring you guys up to speed on who he was in case you don't know, and then I'm gonna get into the legalities of what's going on today. His second release album was Strictly for My Niggaz in February of 1993. This was a massive mainstream crossover that had the songs I Get Around and Keep Your Head Up, one of the positive songs from the 90s. Both of those were on the top 10 of Billboard charts, and those two singles specifically established him as a dominant force in American music. Now, throughout his life and even posthumously, which is after he passed, he's charted some staggering catalog of timeless records. Excuse me, his biggest and most culturally impactful tracks are California Love featuring Dr. Dre and Snoop, with Roger Troutman as well. And this was his ultimate West Coast anthem and a Billboard Hot 100 #1 smash. In fact, that song is still being played on a lot of movies today. You'll hear California Love, and then all of a sudden you hear Dre come in. Let me welcome everybody to the Wild Wild West. That's California Love. Tupac has a verse on that song. Then, of course, the emotional 1995 tribute to his mother, who has since passed away within the last 10 years, Afeni Shakur. Dear Mama, widely considered one of the greatest hip hop songs ever written by any rapper or hip hop artist. And of course, the How Do You Want It remix with California Love. It's a dual sided powerhouse single that dominated the airwaves during the height of the Death Row era. Now, Death Row, that's getting to something else. Suge Knight actually is the founder of Death Row. And we'll get back to that in a minute because this all has to do with why we are having a trial now. What's up, Rick? Thank you so much for supporting me and joining me today. It's always good to see you. Let me make sure I got your comment up there. Good afternoon to you. And yeah, so when you look at it, then he has Changes, which is a haunting prophetic posthumous track talking about systemic racism, poverty, and police brutality. Then Keep Your Head Up was another uplifting, socially conscious classic advocating for women's strength and dignity. And then he had the I Ain't Mad at You, a reflective, soulful look at how relationships change. I Get Around, a high energy party mix, and then Hail Mary, which was a dark, atmospheric masterpiece. That's actually one of my favorite songs by him, into a full scale pop stardom in 1993. Then he had Brenda's Got a Baby, which was a poignant 1991 storytelling debut talking about adolescent pregnancy and urban poverty. Shakur got Grammy nominations during his lifetime and posthumously. He was only 26 when he was murdered, guys. He received, six Grammy nominations during his lifetime, and posthumously, he got Best Rap Album for Me Against the World and Best Rap Solo Performance for Dear Mama and Changes, though he famously never won a competitive Grammy. He was awarded the favorite rap hip hop artist posthumously in 1997. And in the Soul Train Music Awards, he won Best Rap Album for Me Against the World in 1996 and for R&B Soul Rap Album of the Year, All Eyes on Me in 1997. In the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they inducted him posthumously in 2017, which was his first year of eligibility, making him the first solo rapper ever enshrined in the hall. Now, guys, I'm gonna have to pause there because I was just in Canton last week and I flew into Cleveland and saw all the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame stuff. I need to go back through my murals. I took pictures at the airport. They had a lot of murals of everybody there. And I'm going to see if Tupac has been added to that collection yet. But anyway, he was also posthumously awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2023. In 1996, he had diamond certification for the All Eyes on Me and Greatest Hits with the RIAA Diamond status on those, surpassing 10 million and 5 million certified sales units, respectively, making the greatest hits of all time for him. So now let's bring you guys up to speed with why we're talking about Tupac today. Tupac was gunned down September 7th, 1996, after leaving a big fight in Nevada, in Las Vegas to be specific. He was gunned down after a big issue that went down with him, some opposing people. He would pass away 7 days later on Friday the 13th, September 13th, 1996. I still remember where I was. We'll get to all that in a minute, but this is the ghost of the Strip, Tupac Shakur. 30 years of silence, and now a day of reckoning has finally come in Las Vegas. Let's not beat around the bush, guys. We are standing in the intersection of history, music, and raw, unfiltered American tragedy that most people never thought they'd see in their lifetimes. For nearly 30 years, the murder of Tupac Amaru Shakur has existed in a very weird, toxic gray zone between open secret and urban legend. Of course, everyone in hip hop, everyone who lived through the 90s, everyone who ever stared at the poster of a shirtless bandana wearing Pac with Thug Life tattooed across his stomach, they knew the contours of the story. Or at least we thought we all did. We knew about the Mike Tyson fight, which was what precluded all of this, at the MGM Grand Casino there in Las Vegas, right off the Strip. And we knew about, there's a scuffle that's recorded on some cameras between him and Orlando Anderson in the lobby. And we knew about this white Cadillac that would pull up beside Suge Knight's black BMW on the night of September 7th. And we also knew about the 4 shots that changed the trajectory of our global culture forever. And then decades of absolute institutional inertia, 30 years of conspiracies, documentaries, tell-all books, podcasts, finger pointing, while the men who actually orchestrated that hit walked free, occasionally bragging about it on podcasts and cable television like it was honestly a badge of honor to do so. But until now, as we sit here today, the legal system has finally crossed the Rubicon. In a heavily secured courtroom in Clark County, Nevada, a jury of 16, 6 men and 10 women, ranging from 21 years of age, which they clearly were not here when this all happened, all the way up to older people, older than the 50s, who actually watched this cultural shift in real time. This jury has officially been seated, ladies and gentlemen. And so the opening statements are moments away. The man sitting at the defense table is not a ghost. It's none other than Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a self-confessed shot caller of the Southside Compton Crips, this gang in California. This is the man prosecutors are charging him as a conspirator, saying that he orchestrated the entire bloody chain of events. So today, we aren't just looking back, we're looking at a living wound. His mother, like I said earlier on, has passed away, never seeing the closure of her son's murder. And so now we're going to look at the entire arc of Tupac Shakur's life, not as a sanitized museum piece, but as a turbulent, brilliant, terrifyingly complex journey of a revolutionary poet who was actually hunted by his own contradictions. We're going to connect that legacy straight to the witness stand in Las Vegas, which we're going to see here in the next few weeks. We'll be starting the trial where the final chapter of this American tragedy is finally being written. To understand how Tupac turned out so bright, because he was very intelligent, you have to understand that he didn't just pop out of nowhere. He didn't just pop out randomly. He was born into a literal war zone, and things he rapped about, his ideology as well as the resistance that he saw, were all figments of what he saw in his everyday life. He came into this world June 16th, 1971, in East Harlem, New York, originally named Lassane Parish Crooks, but his mother, Afeni Shakur, changed his name to Tupac Amaru. Did you guys know Tupac's real name was Lassane Parish Crooks? Wow. And this was after the last Incan emperor, who was brutally executed by Spanish colonizers, paired with the ancient revolutionary translation meaning shining serpent. That was not just a cool name, guys. His name was actual prophecy. Afeni was not just any mother. She was fierce. She was a militant pillar of the Black Panther Party in New York. She was pregnant with Tupac while she was on bail, facing federal conspiracy charges alongside other members of the Panther 21, which was a group she was in. She spent months locked up in tombs and the Women's House of Detention, fighting both state tooth and nail. And then she beat those charges. And 1 month later, she gave birth to Tupac. So Tupac was actually born in the direct crosshairs of the COINTELPRO, which is a state surveillance, Black radical politics, and systemic oppression. And so his childhood actually became very visible to everyone that would see it. It was transient, unstable, and deeply politicized. They then moved from New York to Baltimore. And then he was so artistic that he was enrolled at the Baltimore School of Arts for Arts. In fact, that's where he met Jada Pinkett. I think Charlie Baltimore was also there, but I know for a fact him and Jada became friends there. If you want to see where the raw power of his delivery came from, look at Baltimore. That's where he was studying Shakespeare, ballet, jazz, and acting. Like I said, very brilliant. He wasn't just a street kid pretending to be an intellectual. He was a literal classical actor who could quote Shakespearean quotes, sonnets, and with the same type of ferociousness and intensity that he would give to his raps, all 16 bars about police brutality. When the family relocated to the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically Marin City and Oakland, things actually changed. The crack cocaine epidemic was really bad. It was tearing Black communities apart from the inside out. And even Afeni, his mom, fell victim to this devastating addiction as it swept through urban America during that time, the Ronald Reagan administration. Tupac had to grow up fast because he became the man of the house. He did sell drugs briefly, but his mind was so advanced and so big and so hyper literate, and too angry just to be on the corner itself selling drugs. So he found his outlet in writing and rapping. In hip hop, he joined Digital Underground, serving as that roadie and dancer I told you guys about at the onset of the show before he dropped his debut album. So Digital Underground, they were known as the Humpty Dance and all these people. They are the ones that were the stepping stone for Tupac being who he is today, being known, being respected, and being, like I said, the greatest of all time. If you listen to his first record today, it will literally give you guys chills. Like, it wasn't party music. It was a Molotov, basically like a cocktail being thrown directly at systemic indifference. When Dan Quayle, the sitting vice president of the United States, publicly attacked Tupac by naming him after a Texas state trooper had been killed by a teenager who claimed to be listening to Tupac at the time, Tupac actually didn't back down. He faced that public criticism head on and established that basically this black man could not read, could not write, think, or anything. And he realized then of who he really was. By the mid 90s, Tupac wasn't just a rapper, he was a cultural phenomenon. He was the rare artist who straddled two entirely different worlds effortlessly. If you think about it, Janet Jackson and John Singleton's Poetic Justice, another 90s movie, or holding his own opposite Mickey Rourke in the movie Bullet. The next, he's in a recording booth, laying down tracks that felt like basically dispatches from a war zone. Tupac was everywhere and anywhere that he could be voiced. His meteoric rise came from basically this fatal flaw, though, guys. His own uncompromising stubbornness, unfiltered and self-destructive mentality, and his intensity often rub people the wrong way. And this is how we get to where we are today with all of the now known issues from Tupac. He popularized the term thug life, and people always wrestle with that. But people actually misunderstood overall what it meant. It wasn't an endorsement of criminality. In fact, thug life stands for the hate you give, little infants, F's everyone. He was talking about a cycle. He was saying, they were trapped in those conditions. They were starved. Then the streets were flooded with drugs and guns by the over people in public, people in charge, politicians, and then you act shocked when monsters are created out of the wreckage. But yet that philosophy drew massive target on his back. This is one of the reasons why I think that this case set for 30 years, guys, with no resolve, because like he was the guy you love to hate, for real. Like, and a lot of politicians literally openly despise it because they despise this rap music, this beat that supposedly glorifies violence. But the contradictions in his life began at that time to multiply dangerously. He was deeply sensitive when he wrote the song like Keep Your Head Up and Dear Mama, two of the most tender, emotionally songs that he ever wrote, and two that are literally historically known to be the greatest songs in music history. But he was also developing an explosive, hair-triggering type temper that was exacerbated by the relentless pressures of fame, legal battles, and the paranoia of feeling like everyone was out to get him. Like he was open with this. This is before social media. So imagine Tupac has Instagram or X now. Oh, he would be on it every day saying something. But in the 90s, his music, his words were all preserved because he would still get out there and tell people, anybody that had a camera, any media, he was like, this is what's happening. This is what I don't like. This is why I am the way I am. But this paranoia was not entirely unwarranted, guys. I mean, in 1993, November, to be specific, he was indicted in New York on sexual assault charges stemming from an incident in a hotel room with a fan named Ayanna Jackson. This is a case that Tupac, to the very end, vehemently denied. He maintained his innocence and claimed that the encounter was consensual. He ended up going to prison on this. Now, he was out on bail fighting that case a year later, November of 94. And then he walked into Quad Recording Studios and started recording in Manhattan. Now, this is what's crazy. While out on bond on that, this is where all the drama really starts to unfold. So follow me here. I know I gave you a lot of back information, but it was for those people who don't know. And feel free to Google Tupac. Trust me, like even people that were not here during his time should know who he is. Like Tupac was that guy. But he goes into this studio, and what happened in this lobby actually changes everything. Two armed men robbed him and shot him 5 times, point blank. Miraculously, he actually survived this. But as he rolled out of the hospital in a wheelchair, he was battered and bleeding. This is all documented. He looked at the media landscape and basically said he felt like he was convinced that people in his inner circle, including figures in New York rap, who he had once considered brothers, had actually set him up to be executed. And he said this in front of the media And there is where the East Coast, West Coast beef began. That paranoia combined with the prison sentence, because he went away for a while on this conviction for the sexual assault, it broke something. He wrote a memoir. I actually read that book. When he was incarcerated, he wrote a book. And it was like a book of poetry, but it was more so delving into who he was, like opening himself up so that more people would be able to understand, okay, this is really who he is behind this supposed gangster facade. Um, Suge Knight, this is the connection for the next for Death Row executive founder Suge Knight actually was imposing. He was the ruthless co-founder of Death Row Records. Well, he paid $1 million, guys, to bail Tupac out of Clinton Correctional Facility in exchange for signing him into a multi-album deal, which is weird because you usually cannot bail people out. I guess he paid some people to get him off this case early, but Tupac was there for several months before this would happen. And then Tupac walked out of prison and went straight into Death Row Records. He didn't walk into Death Row Records. He basically had marched in with an active war zone because he didn't have a whole lot of stuff going on as far as knowledge of what was happening back then, but he does now. In 95 and 96, American hip hop had been hijacked by manufactured high toxic geographical beef between the East Coast and the West Coast. And you still see that a little bit now. Record executives, media outlets, and street loyalties turned artistic competition into a literal blood feud. Like they were literally shooting people. And right at the blazing center of all of this now is where Tupac would be. Death Row had armed affiliates. When he went in there, these guys had weapons on them that were visible. They were wearing, heavy artillery. They were wearing bulletproof vests. Like it was no secret that these guys were gang affiliated and they had, bounties and marks on their heads, so to speak. And then, like I said, Suge Knight is a big dude and he came out very intimidating to other people. So Tupac dropped his All Eyes on Me, which was hip hop's first double CD. I still remember having it. It was a CD, and it was cool. The package was double decker. You just open up, flip up one side, there's one CD, flip up the other, there's the other. But this was a masterpiece. It was defiance, luxury, it was paranoia, and just raw bravado. It was a really, really good album, guys. It had the hits I talked about earlier, California Love, How Do You Want It, which had Jodeci on there. And it dominated the globe. But this became his moving point where he became a mega multi-platinum star. But his personal life behind the scenes was spinning out of control. He was daring death every single day, literally. Everything he did, everything he said was like, check it off. I'm not afraid to die, blah, blah, blah. Talking openly in interviews about how he expected to die young, as if he were racing against this invisible clock. And then I'm moving you guys to September 7th, 1996. Las Vegas, Nevada. Mike Tyson had just fought Bruce Seldon at the MGM's Grand Casino. Tupac, along with Suge Knight, and a whole big entourage, because it was a group of them, flew into town. A massive gathering, a lot of electric energy. Back then, Mike Tyson fighting was a big thing. Money, tension everywhere. I mean, we are in a casino. And after the fight wrapped up, this is where this altercation broke out in the lobby. Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a member of the Southside Compton Crips, was right there in the lobby. Months earlier, Orlando, and his crew had jumped a member of Tupac's Death Row entourage at a Foot Locker in a suburban Lakewood Mall, which is out there in California. Tupac had spotted Orlando now at the MGM Grand's lobby and decided to get retribution. He punched him. Tupac punched Anderson, and then this big brawl breaks out, captured on casino security cameras. That's how we're able to see those today. Security broke it up, and Tupac and his crew actually walked out, and they were heading to a celebration after this fight at a club 662. Now, they never made it. While stopped at a red light on East Flamingo Road near Koval Lane, a white four-door Cadillac pulled up alongside the passenger side of Suge Knight's black 96 BMW 750IL, and the window of the Cadillac would roll down. According to investigators and historical accounts, Orlando Anderson's uncle, a man named Dwayne Keefe D, was sitting inside the car, having allegedly provided a .40 caliber Glock used in the shooting. The gunman leaned out and a barrage of bullets tore through the BMW's passenger door. 4 bullets struck Tupac and hitting him. Most of them were hitting him in the chest, pelvis, right hand, and thigh. Suge Knight sustained a graze wound to the head, but Tupac took the brunt of the kinetic fury, and he fought for his life for 6 agonizing days inside the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, slipping in and out of a drug-induced coma, while fans were all outside this hospital. And on September 13, at just 25 years old, I said 26 earlier, I meant 25, Tupac passed away. And just like that, his music making stopped, but the silence that followed was deafening. So let me just tell you guys, you think about the fact, and I've been to Vegas several times, and I've been to Koval and Flamingo. There is no type of recognition. You know, like sometimes people have flowers or some makeshift memorial when people die. There is nothing there. If you didn't know that's where he passed, you wouldn't know that's where he passed, because there's nothing there symbolizing, you know, we honor his life and legacy. And it's because, like I said, Tupac was the guy you love to hate. You either had to be a fan or you hated him, like literally. And hate is a strong word, but that's the drive that was coming from the White House all the way down to the house next door. You either loved or hated Tupac. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, number one, there's no makeshift memorial. And number two, if you think about it, we are now at 30 years before something has occurred with this case. I'm going to go ahead real quick and take my commercial break so that I can get you guys out the way on that, so that when I come back, we can wrap up the second part of this, because I want to take a nice even break before we get into something else. So you guys, I'll be right back in about 1 minute, 20 seconds.
Get that money, get that pain, like them dollars, get your head in the game. Get that money, get that pain, like them dollars, get your head in the. Turn it up.
What's up, guys? Shout out to McGrath Podcast Network, Pink Fan Fur, Brian Arndt, the production team behind the scenes. I'm wrapping up the second half of the Tupac Shakur life and now subsequent trial that has happened 30 years later. What's up to you, Mr. Holmes? Thank you so much for joining me on today. Yes, absolutely sad. So yeah, guys, so let's get back to it. 30 years, y'all. So most of everyone who was an adult during that time did not live to see this specific day. I was in my 20s when this happened, early 20s at that. And so now to see that, like, this has been up and down, you know, rumors. Some people don't even believe Tupac passed away. They're saying, you know, he's actually somewhere on another island somewhere that, once he was released from the hospital. But none of this is true. But why does it take 30 years? And this is not the only case. The Notorious B.I.G.'s case is also unsolved. Two of the biggest rappers in that era that had the beef, and they were subsequently killed 9 months apart, was the same thing. And so, why would it be 30 years? Because the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department botched several aspects of the initial investigation. And they had this Wall Street code, snitches get stitches. So, this ensured that even those men that knew about it, that were inside this white Cadillac, that they would keep their mouths closed. Orlando Anderson, who was actually the man identified as the actual shooter, denied involvement and was killed 2 years later in an supposedly unrelated shootout in Compton that was gang related. But I don't know if I believe the unrelated at all, because think about it. Sometimes the street issues their own justice. That's why there's a code of silence, because they feel like, okay, the judicial system is going to take too long, or the judicial system is not going to issue the justice we want to see. Because let's face it, even if someone gets the death penalty, they usually are on the death penalty 10, 20 years. No one sees that justice into fruition for the most part. If you're older and you need to make sure you see this all the way out, you're not here when it happens. So the street does their own justice. So in 1998, Orlando Anderson was killed. The same guy that Tupac got into this brawl with, that initiated this entire bloodbath, supposedly. But I would digress to say it started at the Foot Locker back in the mall. But for a long time, it looked like this crime was going to go unpunished by the courts. I mean, we've been I honestly remember hearing rumblings of this case because Keefe D did a podcast back in 2019. He put a book out. He's been everywhere running his mouth, but I'm just like, okay, statute of limitations is usually on certain crimes. There is no statute of limitations, which is murder. But you just don't know how individual states look at things. After all, Nevada is a state that does not impose DUIs, as far as like if you are getting renting a car, you can have open alcohol, but you can't have liability when you rent a car there. You have to have your own liability because it's a no liability state, meaning if someone hits you and they're DUI, they're not liable. Like, it doesn't matter. They have this free type thinking of law out there. But murderers often cannot resist the urge to tell on themselves for clout, for likes, for the loves, for the followers, whatever. And for years, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis played this game. He talked to documentary crews. He spoke with federal and local task force under proffer agreements. But then he would go, plead immunity. He said that these proffer agreements protected him. But then in 2019, everything took a turn, and people are always paying attention. He wrote a tell-all book, y'all, this memoir, and entitled it Compton Street Legend. And in that book, he explicitly lays out his role as the orchestrator of this drive-by shooting. He gives you every single detail as if you're taking notes. He talks about how he handed the gun to his nephew in the heat of revenge. All of this is on record now, all part of the discovery of this case. And he thought he was untouchable. I mean, we're in 2026. He thought writing this book, and then he was on Vlad's podcast, and there was some segments out there where he was like, yeah, the shot came from the back seat. And at the moment, I thought he was saying the back seat of the car that Suge Knight and Tupac were in. But no, he was saying that he was in this vehicle that did the shooting, and that he knows who the shooter was because it was in his vehicle. So he comes out and now says, oh, I handed the gun to them, da 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 da. But everyone says that the window was rolled down from the driver's side. And so Davis now is like, I'm just going to brag. I'm 63 years old at the time. 6 years ago, he's in his late 50s or whatever. I mean, he was making himself famous and getting following just because this was his ticket to financial gain, talking about street mythology. He didn't understand that cold cases never truly die, and they just wait for the right prosecutor to connect the dots. Like all this stuff in the social media era now, there's no secrets, everything is time stamped, and anything you put out there, even though you may go back and delete it later, it is now gone for the taking and now stamped evidence. In late 2023, the Las Vegas police executed finally a high profile raid on the house that was linked to Davis in Henderson, Nevada. So he living not far from the crime scene. Warrants were served and grand jury testimonies were unsealed. Dwayne Keefe D was arrested and charged with murder with the use of a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement on that charge. And he became the very first and the only person to ever formally be charged in connection with the assassination of Tupac. Now, this is now the present moment. As I'm speaking to you guys, the legal battle has actually shifted from speculative podcasts, rabbit holes, memoirs, what have you, to a very high stakes, hyper scrutinized murder trial in Clark County District Court. If we look at what's happening now, the jury selection, which has dominated the headlines over the last few days, they just wrapped up sitting 16 jurors. Like I told you guys, 6 men, 10 women. Think about the questions, which are called the voir dire, during the jury selection. They were probably questioned extensively about their knowledge of gang dynamics, their favorite books and movies, perhaps in case they read this, and whether they had ever listened to Tupac Shakur's music. Imagine sitting there being questioned, knowing you're about to decide the legal legacy of a 1996 murder that literally shaped modern global consciousness. Fans and media are outside of the courtroom a lot, and they've been wearing tribute shirts. In fact, I was looking for my Tupac shirt today. I have a shirt with all the West Coast greats on it. I got it in LA. Could not find it. Saw one with Nipsey, but that's not the shirt I wanted, so I didn't wear it. But they're fighting for a glimpse of this history. And like I said, a majority of young people were not even born when this happened. Keefe D, 63 years old, facing life in prison behind this. He's already, been in custody a couple of years now. His defense team has been fighting tooth and nail, arguing that his book was just a sensationalized fiction co-authored for profit, and that his past confessions to law enforcement were actually made under the promises of protection, confidentiality, immunity. But the prosecutors, which the lead chief prosecutor is Chief Deputy District Attorney Mark DiGiacomo. He has built this case on a mountain. You got to think, Keefe D has not been out on bond. It is now 3 years later. The longer you sit with no bond, the worse it looks from a defensive perspective, because he's made his own public admissions. He's had police interviews and witness testimony are corroborating what he's put in this book. Prosecutors are expected to call between 35 and 45 witnesses during trial. While Suge Knight is one of the main people they're talking about calling, he's serving a 28-year sentence for unrelated 2015 manslaughter in Compton. He's indicated through his counsel that he don't want no parts of coming up there. Like, he's sticking to the street code. If y'all waste your gas and come pick me up and transport me, I'm not saying anything. I still got several years to do in prison. In fact, I still got 20 years. I've only shaved off about 8 years of this manslaughter sentence. So I got a long time to be in prison, and I'm not snitching. So he's already told his counsel to let them know, don't even call me. But They're still going to test. They're still going to want to hear from former associates, eyewitnesses, and investigators who lived through that. And Suge, you're in the car. They're going to call you. You're the main person right there on Tupac's side. That could be on Tupac's side. From a legal perspective, you have to be there, and you were grazed by one of the bullets. So uh, a lot of these eyewitnesses and investigators that initially worked this case, all these people are now witnesses that are going to be called upon by the prosecution. And this prosecution knows that this all defined the 90s hip hop culture. Now, on the first day of the proceedings, Keefe D, I just call him that. They call him Davis. That's his last name. He's already waived his right to be sentenced by a jury, which means if the panel finds him guilty, then Judge Carly Kearney, who is the judge, is going to hand down the sentence directly. So he's doing a jury trial, but he's letting the judge hand down the punishment. I watched the Julio Fulio case. I go back to that every time I hear of something with a rapper being killed, what have you. And I didn't realize in Florida, the jury also stays, and the same thing with the Blaze Taylor case in Tennessee, the Tennessee Titan. I told you guys about that case a while back. Those jurors actually had to stand by for the second phase. After they found him guilty, they also do the victim impact, et cetera, to see if they're going to hand down the death penalty or if they're going to hand down life in prison. Now, I don't believe it hasn't come out that Nevada is seeking the death penalty. I don't even know if they have the death penalty out there. This is just a life in prison sentence. I don't understand, because in some cases, when you're found guilty of something, the only alternative is life in prison with parole or without parole. And in Florida, they don't have parole for a life sentence. So it's just a life sentence or a death penalty. But if you think about this for a moment, excuse me, guys, 30 years, the world has debated about who even killed Tupac. Like, there were so many conspiracies and different names dropped. Who had something to do with it, who didn't have something to do with it. They found the gun supposedly belonging to Orlando Anderson in a yard of another house that was in his neighborhood of like a few years before he died or whatever. Like, it was buried in someone's backyard, some craziness, or tossed in the backyard. I still believe that some kind of way he was a trigger person, but the only person that's still alive to talk about it is Suge Knight and Keefe D. They're the only ones that were in either vehicle that are still alive to talk about what they saw. Opening statements, of course, are going to be beginning, because you got to think about it. At the very end, Tupac was a brilliant kid from Harlem, gave his voice to the voiceless, fought his own inner demons, and was gunned down in the prime of his life on a Las Vegas street corner. And it's almost like now the memory, the imagery of who Tupac was is finally demanding a reckoning in a court of law. 30 years later, now whether justice is ultimately served or not, one thing is certain: the conversation has now changed forever. If you think about it, Tupac was this person that everyone deserves justice. But to be 25, you often think about, where would this person be had they still lived? Where would their artistry be? I invite all of you who were not here even during the time of Tupac to Google him, look up some of his works, look up some of his writings. Even if you can get your hands on the memoir, I'm going to try to find the memoir again. I read it years ago. I'm going to try to see if I can't find a copy. In this day and age, everything is online PDF, so you probably can find it. But this is a case that they're expecting to last for 2 months because of all the witnesses they're expecting to call. And it's basically a time when there's finally going to be some type of justice. I don't know. My feelings are mixed on that. This dude is 63 years old. If you give him, if he gets convicted, he's going to face life, which means he'll never get out of prison, because some states life is like 30 years and you're already 60 something. And, you know, I just, wish that more people were held accountable. And that's not just for a Tupac standpoint, that's for anybody. You're riding in a car, you are on your way somewhere, and a fist fight has now spilled over to bloodshed. And this was not Tupac's first time getting shot. I remember people saying, in fact, Biggie said it. Um, when he heard that Tupac had gotten shot, he was like, again, everybody thought that Tupac was just going to pull through this. And his raps were so prophetic. He referenced, like death a lot. And so it was so ironic that he passed away on Friday the 13th, September 13th. I still remember where I was. Um, I remember being in college, being in the student center and seeing it. They had back then, they had big screen TVs, the floor models on the floor. I saw it. I was on my way to the dining hall with some friends, and I saw that it went across the bottom of the screen that Tupac had passed away. And I immediately went back to my dorm. Y'all, I didn't go to class for like 2 days. It felt like someone in my family had passed away because I had, during your 20s, sometimes you go through depression and things like that. But so much of his music, I felt like I identified with. And to know that he was gone and that he had been murdered, not that this was an accident, this was intentional and at the hands of someone else, was just the worst kind of hurt. Sorry, guys. I don't know how I'm on here twice. Hang on. Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm back, guys. Sorry about that. I had a little technical glitch. But anyway, like I was saying, just knowing that he was, taken down in his prime was just hurtful. So 30 years, it's even more sad that it took 30 years for someone to really find evidence. Like, it's crazy that only him, Keefe D, running his mouth, talking to the blogs and stuff, is the reason why we have any type of leadway. The defense is going to argue, like I said, that this is all fictional, that he's just, sensationalizing some of the events so that he can get paid and, be financially set and all this stuff. But if you have intricate details and they match specific evidence, especially from the crime scenes, because these unsolved crimes, they have preserved this evidence as best they know how. And in 2026, there's way more technology out there that can help put the pieces together. I remember working for this firm years ago that this guy in Michigan had been incarcerated for over 20 years for burning down the house with his wife and his children in it. And he was not even allowed to go to the funeral or anything because they thought he did it. Well, now you have fire reconstructive evidence and reconstructive experts that were able to put two and two together and realize there was no accelerant present at the scene to even have arrested him for this. So the first stop that he made when he was released, the attorney I knew drove him to the cemetery so he could give a proper goodbye to his wife. But how sad is that? You were innocent. You didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to your wife. And it's 20 years later. You've lost 20 years of your life. You clearly passed away in some sense of the word that day that she passed. And now you're finally free, but you're starting all the way over from scratch in a different world because in 20 years, everything is so different. But to know that we have this type of technology, Keefe D, like I said earlier, a criminal can never sit on something long enough. Either they're conscious commands them to start spewing it out, or they feel like they have some type of bragging rights that they want to brag about it. But get ready for this case to kick off. It's gonna be streamed. I know right now they're closing a lot of stuff. Law and Crime will probably have it on YouTube. I'm hoping they will stream it. There's been so many cases right now that they're not allowing the media in. The David case is another one. I think that's specifically because the victim, Celeste, was only 14. So, for age appropriate reasons and protections, they may not be streaming that. But I believe the whole world is waiting to see what happens with this Tupac Shakur murder. And there's been rumors, of course, over the years that Puffy was connected. Puffy is supposedly called by the on the witness list as well. He's incarcerated on his other stuff. Everybody knows about Puffy. And so this may be a witness list of investigators as well as music artists that are still in the business or may not be in the business anymore that were around during that time. But I hope it's streamed. If not, I'll make sure I plug you guys in when I can. All right, guys, that's all the time I have for today. It is officially football season. I know my Panthers, I'm going to plug this in real quick. They were losing before I got on here. I think it was 29-13. Yep, 29-14 was scored 1 point. Under the Buffalo Bills. Right now, the Saints game is going on, and they are playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know you guys want to get to that. Right now, the Saints are up 7-6. This is preseason, so it's just the B and C squads trying to make the team. But I said all that to say football is back. Next Friday with the fellas, we'll be focusing on college sports. We're going to be doing a little college preview. Hopefully all the gents can join us then. But tomorrow morning, the Sunday morning big football show. On your way to church, make sure you check us out. 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Stream of Consciousness also by Keith Engel follows after that. We got the Dr. Sims show, which is Major League Baseball, specifically New York Yankees news. We got BW Flicks, which is a movie review. They're doing Legal Weapon 3 and 4 on Tuesday at 8 p.m. Make sure you guys are there for that. Got other shows throughout. Pink Fan First, Super Fan, Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Normally I have another show on Wednesdays, but classes are starting back for me. And so I will be only on the Friday with the Fellas show going forward. And so you guys will be able to catch some of the encore presentations on Wednesday. And if you are definitely following us, make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Thank you guys so much for a wonderful afternoon. Today's show is dedicated to my mentor, the Honorable Ronald Ramsey Sr. Yesterday was his first heavenly birthday. Love you, Judge. Always appreciate you. And with that, I wish everyone an amazing day and weekend ahead. God bless.